The release of the new Ancient Gear structure deck provides much needed support to the archetype. For Ancient Gear, this support was important, for when simply looking at the sheer number of cards available within the archetype before this release, one would think that Ancient Gears should have a sufficient amount of support to field a competitive product. But, when actually looking at the support, one can only sadly shake the head, for it is rather bad. With the new support, Ancient Gears can field a much more competitive product. So, what does my Ancient Gear deck look like? Looking at the direct archetype support first, one of the newer toys in the family, Reactor Dragon, is a quality monster that receives different effects, whether it is normal summoned by tributing an Ancient Gear or a Gadget monster. Piercing for the Ancient Gear, and a second attack for the Gadget. Fortunately, unlike a card like Hydra, Reactor Dragon has its own innate effect as well beyond the generic Ancient Gear Armades type effect. The ability to destroy one spell or trap after attacking, which is rather useful for dealing with those various annoying opponent back row cards, or triggering your own combo cards like Fortress or Geartown. Overall, do not count on receiving the Ancient Gear or Gadget effect that often, despite the tribute-reducing effect of Geartown, for most of the time Reactor Dragon will be hitting the field from the deck or the hand via a card effect versus a tribute summons. The one major drawback in my eyes to Reactor Dragon is being level 9 instead of level 8 or level 10, which limits the versatility of the extra deck plays you could make with it if the duel is not over, but summoning True King of the Calamidies is not bad if necessary when it's eventually released. I like running 2 copies, for 3 copies in my opinion tend to clog. Moving on to the original boss monster for Ancient Gear, Golem was once a meaningful monster to run, and a centerpiece of the Ultimate Golem OTK. However, as it stands, Golem is not that useful anymore, because not only does the no special summon condition on it hurt despite Catapult, but while 3000 attack with piercing can still be useful, a card like Reactor Dragon tends to produce more utility over both the short and the long haul. This deck needs to worry about bricking with too many high-level monsters as it is, and Golem loses out to Reactor in my opinion. Due to it being a V-Jump promo, who really knows when the new retrained version of Golem Ultimate Pound will ever come out, but when it does, it should be a solid 1-copy card for this deck, due to the ability of Catapult to put it on the field from deck due to its ignoring summoning condition. Ultimate Pound is definitely an OTK machine with the frequent ability to attack multiple times at the cost of discarding machines from the hand, which in this deck should not be a problem. In some respects, Ultimate Pound is kind of the yin to Chaos Giant's yang. If your opponent has a lot of monsters, Chaos Giant buries them. If your opponent has few monsters, Ultimate Pound buries them. The destruction-based search is nice, but you will tend not to get a lot of use out of it, because most of the time when Ultimate Pound hits the field, the duel will end. Now that Reactor has been released, Reactor Dragon is no longer useful, for Reactor takes over the heavy hitter role of the deck, and as mentioned, Reactor's effect is significantly better than Reactor Dragon. Overall, the gadget-based tribute summons are rather soft and were never really a reason to run this card. The 3000 attack and its affinity with Geartown was all that really mattered, but now Reactor takes that role with the additional actual useful back row destruction effect. In my opinion, Hydra is basically worthless, for its banish effect is rather weak, inconsistent, and super costly relative to what it takes to summon Hydra in the first place. The gadget-based effect is rather pathetic unless Hydra is under a limiter removal, which is far too seldom for it to matter. Basically, there are a lot better cards that can handle monsters over Hydra, be them monsters, spells, or traps. Gadgetron Chimera is just another version of Dragon that is a little easier to summon and does a little less overall. Even if you are running gadgets, Chimera is not good enough for the resources demanded. In the past, Beast was not a bad card, just selectively good, although 2000 attack was always on the light side for a single tribute monster. However, now with the new support, Beast is just not good enough, largely because that attack is just too low relative to the existing and future meta. If you are interested in summoning Cyber Dragon Infinity, just tech in some Cyber Dragons, for Engineer is just too bad in my opinion to really use with its low attack, and its basic dependency on Geartown's tribute reduction effect to accomplish anything, for there are so many other ancient gears that should be summoned via spell effect over this guy. Knight is just another old card that was largely run for its name, but now it's rather worthless despite being searchable by box. Moving on from some of the older power creep monsters to a great support piece, let's welcome Wyvern to the discussion. A normal or special summons produces a search for any Ancient Gear card, which will normally be Catapult or Fortress, resulting in a large play in the future. For those interested in setting up a fusion play, Wyvern can grab Ancient Gear Box, which then can grab another 500 or lower attack or defense Ancient Gear to set up the fusion summon. However, the no-set restriction of the card can break your heart in a sense when it comes to Ancient Gear Reborn or Ancient Gear Drill, limiting overall versatility. However, regardless of this unfortunate restriction, running 3 copies is basically mandatory. Soldier is another old guard card that was run largely for its name, but is now rather worthless. Yes, I pretty much just repeated that from my Knight commentary without the box searchability plus. While not powerful on its own, Gadget can do a nice job of covering some of the gaps that some Ancient Gears have in their ability to restrict opponent card activation when attacking. It can also be useful as a tribute choice due to being both an Ancient Gear and a Gadget. Its 2000 defense is also rather solid for being a Reborn target or just setting when nothing else is available. However, overall, a vast majority of the time, its role will be as fusion material, typically added to the hand after a box search. Due to deck space issues, though, I only run 2 copies instead of 3. Ancient Gear Box has always been one of those lost potential cards because of the lack of quality search targets, especially in its own archetype. With the new support, Box finally can live up to some of that potential, with Wyvern easily triggering its effect, Gadget being a somewhat meaningful search target, and Howitzer being a good 2-material fusion monster. However, I only run 1 copy of Box for 2 reasons. First, whether run at 1 or multiples, you really do not want to draw this card, and 1 copy obviously limits this probability. Second, only 1 box search combination really should be necessary as a fusion jumping off point, so to speak. Can you run multiple copies? Sure. I simply find that the deck space is better used for other cards. Hound is definitely a solid choice for the deck, for the nice 600 burn damage that is actually more valuable than one would initially think, because it can definitely add up with the damage produced by Howitzer. Also, the fusion effect is definitely high quality for getting out that super important Howitzer on the field as fast as possible. 3 copies are highly recommended. Remember what I said about Ancient Gear Soldier? Just replace Soldier with Ancient Gear or Ancient Gear Cannon. That says enough. One of the new fusion monsters, Chaos Giant, is a great finisher card as a 4500 attacker that cannot be bothered by spell or trap effects and hits all opponent monsters with piercing. Chaos Giant crushes floaters and will typically result in at least 4000 damage, if not outright victory, when it hits the field. Chaos Giant also has the extremely helpful Dark attribute over Earth, allowing it to come out and play from an Overload fusion activation, saving a number of in-hand and on-field resources for the player. However, not surprisingly, don't expect Chaos Giant to stay on the field for long if the opponent has any real hand due to the lack of monster protection. One strategy could be to run various forms of negation like Effect Veilers and Forbidden Chalices to support Chaos Giant being on the field, but this strategy tends to be inconsistent in my experience, for Giant should be the finisher, and Howitzer should be the wall/advantage dealer. Overall, I run 2 copies of Chaos Giant. Ultimate Golem was once the centerpiece of an OTK, and is still not a bad card, but our friend, good old Mr. Power Creep, has seen it replaced by both Chaos Giant and Howitzer. The need to include Ancient Gear Golem or an appropriate fusion substitute to bring it out also hurts the usefulness and consistency. Howitzer is a staple at 2 or 3 copies, and should see the field as fast as possible to provide field control, burn, and deck thinning support. The ability to special summon any main deck Ancient Gear monster from the deck, regardless of summoning condition, when it is destroyed by battle, which will happen a vast majority of the time when it is removed from the field due to the card effect immunity, is quite nice at creating next turn combo plays. The ability of Reborn to summon it from the graveyard also puts significant pressure on the opponent to get rid of Reborn. I like running it at 3 copies, but if one needs an extra deck spot, 2 copies is usually sufficient. Catapult is the new ace spell card for the deck, allowing you to summon any Ancient Gear monster from the deck, ignoring any summoning condition. The common combination with Catapult is obviously pairing its destruction effect with Geartown, which does not miss timing with Catapult, to put a high-powered Ancient Gear monster on the field like Reactor Dragon, put Hound for fusion summoning, or Wyvern for searching. The biggest power play Ancient Gears have right now is Catapult destroying a Geartown. While the graveyard effect is not that useful, it is nice to have as a means to pop Geartown when destruction is not available in your hand, and can produce some nice material for fusion summons because the token is an Ancient Gear monster. 3 copies. If Spell Gear destroyed rather than sent to the graveyard, it would be one heck of an interesting risk-reward card. However, that is not the case, basically making it worthless. Explosive is worthless due to a complete lack of reliable combo potential, skip it. Factory is so bad it makes you want to cry. Workshop can be rather useful for grabbing a sent Wyvern to set up a box combo, or even grabbing a box to set up another search. However, in my opinion, I just do not see enough usefulness from it to warrant it taking up any deck space. Overall, I just don't think it's consistent enough. Drill used to be an interesting choice, but now with Wyvern, there really is no point to running it. It's time to talk about another new card. Fortress is rather interesting, for the ability of Fortress to shut down all destruction and targeting opponent card effect can go a long way to increasing OTK and overall win probability, especially with the innate effects of Ancient Gear monsters, allowing them to neutralize any battle traps that could avoid Fortress protections. Cough, Drowning Mirror Force, cough. Also, the secondary protection ability is nice, preventing the opponent from using any spell speed 2 negators on your Wyverns or spell cards. Finally, Fortress acts as a nice secondary destruction option for Catapult, netting a summons from the graveyard or hand. Unfortunately, though, the only Ancient Gear condition for the rest of the turn as a summoning issue can be rather annoying, shutting down other forms of combo extension and defensive measures if your OTK push fails. Overall, I run 2 copies because Fortress can be rather bricky at 3 copies, and this deck cannot afford such brickiness in my opinion. Before the new support, Castle was definitely a quality card that helped extend combos or even start them. But now that the new support exists, Castle has lost a lot of its overall value in the deck, because most of the time the higher monsters are coming out via the effects of Geartown, Catapult, and Fortress, rather than being summoned from the hand. And thanks to Hound, in-hand Ancient Gears are more likely to hit the graveyard for fusion summons of Chaos Giant or Howitzer. Tank and Fist are both horrible cards, skip them. Geartown is definitely a card worth running at 3 copies, for it is one of the chief combo starters for the archetype, and can even help with normal summoning from time to time due to its 1 less tribute effect. Unfortunately, Geartown can also be an incredibly frustrating combo piece due to that pesky when in its effect, i.e. it misses timing. The missed timing aspect is rather common in its annoyance, because if you activate it, the opponent has the opportunity to destroy it in a chain to the activation, basically anything that is quick play, and if that happens, no Geartown effect. So if one thinks to outsmart the opponent and sets Geartown, where if the opponent chooses to destroy it, its destruction effect would not miss timing because it's not in the chain with Geartown's activation, this strategy is limited in its value because revisiting Catapult's effect, there's the facepalm. Catapult only works on a face-up card. So there are times when you will have no monsters and Geartown plus a Catapult, and the opponent will be able to spoil the combo by destroying Geartown before the Catapult can. So there will definitely be frustrations brought on by Geartown, even with Catapult's existence. Also, another smaller drawback is that Geartown does not ignore summoning conditions, so plan accordingly. Despite the missed timing issues, though, 3 copies are basically mandatory. Ancient Gear Reborn is a nice card because it provides a quality defense when the opponent breaks the line, so to speak. Also, it has no restrictions on what Ancient Gear can be special summoned as long as it can be special summoned. Granted, there are times when it will be dead because there is a monster on your field, but it is still worthwhile. However, that monster on the field restriction restricts it to a 1-copy card for me. Overall, the principal strategy of Ancient Gears that most people are aware of is destroying Geartown and freely putting large monsters on the field, and now with Catapult in the play pool, this ability is heavily augmented by adding a second high-quality monster to the field. However, the deck needs another strategy, for the Catapult Geartown strategy is certainly not explosive or consistent enough against most other competitive decks. Overall, I feel one should lean heavily on fusion summoning and stalling for the deck due to the general explosiveness of the deck. To this point, for the non-ancient gear monsters, I run 1 copy of Electromagnetic Turtle and 3 copies of Swift Scarecrow to reduce the ability of the opponent to levy heavy damage against me, and 1 copy of Plaguespreader Zombie to provide small synchro opportunities. Something players that are familiar with other builds will note is that I do not run gold or silver gadgets. Overall, I'm not a fan of the synergy of gold and silver gadgets in this deck because their floating effect interfere with Catapult activation, making their defensive capacities clunky, and their rank 4 playmaking is muted in a sense for, while the possibility certainly exists to go normal summon gold, special summon Wyvern, search Catapult, activate Geartown, special summon Diamond Dire, pop itself, and pop an opponent's card, then activate Catapult on Geartown, special summon 2 ancient gears from the deck, more than likely a pair of reactors. The proficiency of this combo is not as valuable as it first seemed, and I simply like the defensive counterattack strategy that the Swift Scarecrows and Electromagnetic Turtle provide instead, especially due to the consistency problems this deck can have. For the non-ancient gear spells, I run the obvious 3 copies of Terraforming for field spell searching, 1 copy of Raigeki for monster destruction in case combo pieces are not available immediately, and for board breaking, 2 copies of Dark Hole, which fills a similar role as Raigeki and clears monsters from your side of the field, making Catapult live from the hand for combo potential with Geartown or Fortress. Not surprisingly, I run 3 copies of Twin Twister to aid combo playmaking, both by destroying opponent back row and destroying both Geartown and Fortress. Finally, for the fusion support, I run 2 copies of Overload Fusion for Chaos Giant summoning using graveyard resources. Unfortunately, Howitzer is Earth, so no Overload Fusion summoning for him. I run 1 copy of Instant Fusion for the obvious Norden access. Also, I run 1 copy of Polymerization and 1 copy of Fusion Recycling Plant for polymerization searching. With the availability of Hound as a fusion catalyst, so to speak, one might wonder about these 2 choices. The general importance of getting Howitzer on the field as fast as possible cannot be underestimated due to its ability to control the field and set up future combos. So, with Terraforming at 3 copies, when you do not have a destruction element, grabbing Recycling and eventually Poly to make Howitzer can produce much more value than grabbing Geartown and hoping for the best. However, for those who do not see value in this strategy, then running a pair of Lost Winds makes sense to reduce Howitzer destruction probability and slow the pace of the opponent playmaking. Finally, closing out the deck, I run 1 copy of Torrential Tribute as basically a quick play version of Dark Hole. For the extra deck, in addition to the Ancient Gear fusions, I run the following: 1 Elder Entity Norden, 1 Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, 1 Blackwing Nothung the Starlight, fairly solid generic, also helps with that burn damage, because you'll be burning the opponent a lot with this deck, 1 Stardust Charge Warrior, 1 True King of all Calamidies when it comes out. Before it comes out, I'm running 1 Phantom Fortress Enterblathnir, 1 number 23 Lancelot, Ghost Knight of the Underworld. It's a 2000 direct attacker that you can make off double Howitzer, and then you get the negation during your opponent's next turn. 1 Gear Gigant X, 1 Castel the Skyblaster Musketeer, 1 Diamond Dire Wolf, obviously for clearing your field, it can pop itself and pop something your opponent has, or pop itself and pop Geartown, and 1 Gaga Cowboy, more burn damage. In the end, the new Ancient Gear deck has some nice advantages. With the right cards, it can be incredibly explosive, OTKing the opponent rather easily and thoroughly, and threat of Chaos Giant being dropped can heavily limit the desire of the opponent to swarm the field. Also, the deck has a nice set of burn tools in Hound and Howitzer to chip away at the opponent's life points, reducing the need to drop Giant or multiple Reactor Dragons. Unfortunately, though, the disadvantages are meaningful as well, for the archetype really does not have a suitable number of quality monsters, despite the newer monsters. Thus, the lack of quality in-archetype options can produce general inconsistency in plays and attack flow. This inconsistency is far and away the biggest problem for the deck. Also, despite the appearance of high attack power threats, the deck can have trouble getting over higher attack point monsters without relying on Chaos Giant. Overall, if this deck ever receives another 1 or 2 quality level 4 or lower Ancient Gear monsters, then it could do something. But right now, at the moment, while it is competitive, its inconsistency keeps it down from that Tier 1 big boy level. Well, that is my Ancient Gear deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.